Hi, my name's Sophie Scott and I'm a cognitive neuroscientist at University College London, and I'm interested in human communication and human voices. I think it's an essential part of being a scientist that you have conversations with practitioners like teachers, because it's no good doing great science in the lab if you can't get the results of that science out to the people who are actually working in the situations where you could make a difference. So it doesn't matter how good my understanding of the human brain processing of sound is, if I can't tell that to people for whom that could make real differences to what they do and how they do it, then it almost might as well not have happened. I think vocal communication is important, first of all, because it's the primary social tool for interactions around the world. If people have hearing that's intact, they will normally communicate with speech. It's a universal use of the human voice. And I think it's also very important because a lot of other stuff builds on that. So learning to read is critically dependent on actually how your brain decodes speech. And I think it's also very important because it can go wrong in so many ways. It can go wrong in ways that are to do with almost the computational parts of language, and it can go wrong in terms of how fluent you are, and it can go wrong in terms of, like a myriad. It's such a complex phenomenon that there's so many different aspects of it that can actually make your life more challenging. So I think being able to have these conversations about the different aspects about speech and language and voices, and understanding, I suppose, partly how much more we communicate than just the words that we're saying. So the way that you talk is conveying a lot of information about yourself as well as the words that you're saying. And frequently, certainly in adults, that can be what things can be most frustrating if something goes wrong with your voice, is that you don't sound the way you used to. You're not you anymore. So there's almost an identity aspect to it as well. One of the things that's really interesting about human speech perception is, in fact, we very rarely listen to speech in quiet environments. There's often a background noise. And actually, there's some very interesting research showing that there are lifespan changes in how easy it is to be distracted by ongoing other sounds. And actually, children are more distracted by the sounds of adult voices than adults are. The thing that trips adults up most is if there's a continuous noise going on, like a fan or an air conditioning unit. But actually, children are disrupted more by other things, the sounds of other people talking. And I think that could have implications for a lot of what we're doing in the classroom. Speech perception basically refers to going from sounds in the world to something you can hear as linguistic. And actually, it is an extremely flexible system because we all sound different. Very few people have got exactly the same voice, and of course that means that your speech sounds different. But in fact, if you're a native speaker of a language, you don't normally get tripped up by that variation. So at some point, your auditory system has got to be really good at coping and retuning very quickly into sometimes highly speaker-specific ways that people have of talking. So we tend to think of speech perception as going from sound to meaning, but actually that's a very variable journey, and it's one that we don't notice how much brain power we're actually having to throw at that, because it's a lot, and we do it effortlessly, of course, until things go wrong. I'm also interested in the fact that, as I say, when people talk, they don't just express words. They're giving away a lot of other information about themselves. They're expressing their identity, their geographical origins, their health, and also, of course, their mood. And the voice is a very important way that we express emotion. I think we don't know enough yet about how children cope with that kind of variation, because we all grow up learning spoken language, from the people around us who are also talking it. So you don't know the version that you're learning and then your ability to kind of cope with other versions of that same spoken language until we're older. So I suspect that actually there is a developmental trajectory to this, how easy it is for you to cope. On one hand, children's brains are much more plastic than adults' brains, and they can cope with, for example, having a cochlear implant much better than an adult brain can do. But in terms of learning to deal with the variability in the world, I suspect that's something that maybe children need a little bit more space to cope with. Laughter is interesting because we tend to think it's something we do to mark humour and comedy, and of course we do laugh when we find things funny. Most of the laughter that you perceive and you produce when you're out and about in your normal day actually is more communicative. So we laugh most when we're with other people. That means we laugh most in conversations with other people. And we're doing that for social reasons largely. We're mostly still not laughing at jokes. We are laughing to make and maintain social bonds. We're laughing to show affiliation, you know, we're part of the same group. We're laughing to show affection. We're laughing to show we understand. We're laughing to show we agree. So actually laughter has a much more complicated life than the laughter we use to mark, oh, I get that joke, although that's also very interesting. But it has this bigger sort of social role, and it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting of the kind of social and emotional impact of what's going on in a conversation, in addition to what's being said. I think one thing I'd be keen to sort of have more conversations with teachers about is not worrying about what you sound like. Because people commonly say, oh, I don't like how I sound, I don't like listening to myself. But actually, being confident in your voice, comfortable in your voice, is what people react to more than anything truthful about voices in and of themselves. So I think a lot of how confident and comfortable you are in a situation comes through in your voice, and the opposite can also be true. So the way to work with that is, I think, to let yourself be confident in your voice. Don't worry about your accent or anything, because that matters a lot less than how much people pick up on you sounding just like you feel okay with it. I think that neuroscience and education aren't separate things that occasionally kind of inform each other. We know human brains don't work straight out of the box. We are juveniles for quite a long period, and across that time our brains are changing and growing. And by the time we work with any adult, what we're looking at is a brain that's been through a phenomenal period of development, and part of that development is going to be the opportunities and experiences you had as part of education. So I think that we're looking at education from a neuroscience perspective. We're looking at the applied end of one of the things that we're interested in terms of just the brains getting the best opportunity they can have to be the best brains they can be. If you want to change your brain, you give that brain opportunities to learn and grow. That's education. So I think it's an essential conversation, and it's a conversation that should be going both ways.